For millennia, women have been underrepresented and discriminated against, believed to be inferior to men. Yet women bring much to society, not only in the family but also in the community. The American Republic was founded to create liberty and justice for all the people of the nation. However, it failed for over a century to extend democracy to women. In 1869, a Women's Rights Act in Wyoming produced one of the greatest expansions of the political frontier in United States history and was the first instance worldwide where women were given a vote equal to men. By creating a pathway for a series of political movements over the centuries, the women's rights movement in early Wyoming led America to a new political frontier. It reinforced the idea of liberty for all and allowed a better American society to emerge. As everywhere, American women faced many issues. Prejudice against women prevented most from obtaining education and adequate jobs. Working women in need of money were paid less than men simply on account of sex. Life was difficult for widows and deserted women, especially those left with children. Most of all, even while many women worked and all were subject to laws and taxes as men were, women could not vote or have any influence in the government created to represent the people. It was thought that men represented their wives' interests. Just like the belief that slaveholders represented their slaves, this was untrue. With African American male voting rights protected with the 15th Amendment, women saw they could gain suffrage as well. Female suffragists sought not only to rid of women's problems, but those of all society. 19th century America saw poor regulation of food and drugs and high rates of alcoholism, along with immense urbanization, characterized by dense populations, pollution, prostitution, and low-grade factory conditions. Women feared for their children as well, desiring to alleviate juvenile delinquency and the lack of education. Male voters and politicians tended to focus more on Southern Reconstruction and the economic situation, mostly ignoring the former issues. Women desired the true representation and equality promised by the Constitution, to rid of the many obstacles they faced, and to ensure their children could grow up in safe environments. In 1868, Wyoming was admitted as a new territory of the United States. Suffrage amendments were debated and failed in federal and state politics, yet one would soon emerge on the frontier. The West emerged as the greatest opportunity for female suffrage, with no entrenched patriarchal system and a need for order in the face of lawlessness and vice, and a scant population with few women especially. Female suffrage was an appealing idea. The women's suffrage movement was growing in the country, many advocates traveling to various states. In June the next year, the nationally renowned Anna Dickinson was passing through Wyoming and was stopped by an eager mob. She agreed to lecture in the capital of Cheyenne in September. Dickinson was met by a large audience, including the territory's governor, with her arrival and lecture attracting much media attention from the Cheyenne leader. Just 2 months later, suffragist Cordelia Bates spoke to the Wyoming public in the state's House of Representatives. Her speaking ability was well received by both the leader and Wyoming Tribune. The former refrained from attacking women's suffrage, while the latter was persuaded by Bates's arguments. During this time, Council President William H. Bright, working with his wife, Mrs. Julia Bright, along with Mrs. Esther Morris, and Wyoming Tribune writer Secretary Lee, planned to introduce a bill allowing women to vote and hold political office, motivated by the territory's growing support of women's suffrage. December of 1869, in the legislature's inaugural session, Council President William Bright introduced the much-anticipated act before a wide audience. Thankfully, on a vote of 7-4, it was passed by the Legislative Assembly. Still awaiting the governor's signature, the Wyoming Tribune applauded the act as the measure of the session, which made Wyoming the leader of a movement destined to become universal. After stalling for 4 days, the act was signed by Wyoming's first governor, John Allen Campbell. The Tribune proclaimed, "All honor to the youngest territorial sister." The act was passed for various reasons. Some legislators were propelled by the suffragist lectures and believed it just that women should have this equality. Others wanted to draw a larger population, particularly female, into the territory, while many senators saw the act as an extreme joke, an idea denied by Bright. Nonetheless, it was ratified. September the next year, a surge of women took to the polls. 7 women were elected to the state's petite jury, with 5 on the grand jury, including Mrs. Esther Morris, who rose to fame as the nation's first female judge, and was later dubbed the mother of women's suffrage because of the theory that she deserved the credit for writing the Women's Rights Act. As her town's justice of the peace, Morris handled several cases in only a partial term. With none of her decisions overturned or sent to a higher court, she proved a woman's capability, even with her little education. However, in the next following years, Wyoming judges rid of female jurors, believing they were not capable without the education and experience men had. And a proposal to repeal Bright's Act even arose after women elected Republicans to the all-Democrat legislature. Yet suffrage prevailed. The repeal was vetoed by Governor Campbell, even though he was bribed for $2,000 by the Democrats. An attempt to overturn Campbell's veto failed by one vote. Women continued to influence politics and serve in other county and state positions in Wyoming, inspiring other states and territories to enact similar measures. The movement still on the frontier, Utah protected female suffrage in 1870. Later, the Brights moved to Denver and campaigned for sex equality. Colorado became a suffrage state in 1893. Suffrage continued to spread, and the path was set for a national movement. In the many states in which it was adopted, female suffrage quickly produced results. In Wyoming, numerous laws were passed because of the women's vote, prohibiting gambling, ridding of adulterated food and drug trafficking, and creating strict regulations on liquor, among other things. Influential suffragists, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, often commended Wyoming and looked upon its progress as an example for female suffrage. Beginning in the Rocky Mountains, territories and states motivated by the progress in Wyoming enfranchised their women, who voted for laws similar to those of Wyoming, while creating other policies. Female suffragists met much opposition, with many claiming that women were morally inferior, or shouldn't vote because only men served in the military. Some asserted there was no need for more voters, as female voters would only imitate their husbands, or because voters were already ignorant, and enfranchising women would make the issue worse, especially since men were given a better education. Despite antagonism, suffragists fought back. Women redefined their place in society, establishing joint guardianship and separate property rights for spouses, while aiding victims of sexual trafficking, creating pensions for widows and deserted women, and punishing deserting husbands. Female voters also focused on their children and reached out to all society by developing better education with childcare and labor laws, by establishing the minimum wage and working age and maximum work hours. Female voters also outlawed red light districts and capital punishment, and created regulation of factory conditions. Female suffrage was a success, greatly improving the quality of living and rescuing underrepresented and desperate women. In the 20th century, more suffrage spread throughout the United States, getting a broader outreach to women in white-collar jobs. Eventually, in addition to women's votes having an impact, so did female politicians. Carrie Chapman Catt and the National American Women's Suffrage Association led campaigns to gain suffrage state by state, while lauding Wyoming as the pioneer state for female suffrage. Alice Paul and the National Women's Party led many drastic protests and strikes, while lobbying presidents and Congress for equality, and holding assemblies attended by prominent people, with tens of thousands of members at its height. Women's campaigns soon grew to national prominence, with the prohibition movement resulting in the 18th Amendment. While it was repealed, it demonstrated how women could cause major political change. Even in the 21st Amendment, which reneged the 18th, alcohol commerce is made a federal crime in states where it is prohibited. Eventually, the 19th Amendment was passed with the aid of numerous women's parties and organizations. The most prominent change of the women's rights movement, it protects suffrage throughout the United States. During the Civil Rights Movement, the NWP gained the support of politicians, male and female, who provided invaluable aid. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was amended with the long-fought-for Title VII, which now abolishes sex discrimination in employment, previously a major barrier for American women. For a long period in American history, women were restrained from the inalienable rights they deserved and were forced to remain dominated by males and marginalized in society. Women were forced to watch their children and husbands as well endure the many obstacles of pioneer or industrial life. It was not until the founding of a territory on the frontier that female suffrage arose and America was brought to a revolutionary political frontier. As today, women embrace equal rights in voting, office holding, education, and employment, among many other outlets. The liberty and justice promised so long ago for all Americans was at last given to women, and the greatest difficulties of life on the frontier or early industrial America were finally acknowledged and solved. The women's rights movement, and all the change ushered with it, all began in a young territory and a symbol of hope, known as Wyoming.